everyone. This is the first podcast that we're trying to put out at Red Bicycle Media. My name is James Pizarro. I founded Red Bicycle Media around 10 years ago and had the privilege and really just of fun of meeting so many people. And as if there are not enough podcasts, I decided to just at least give it a try and see if I can get people to at least join in the community of filmmakers and creatives to kind of tell their stories. I have had the privilege of working with so many different types of people and so many lines of work and walks of life that I want to at least invite them in to see if they could talk about their stories and how they've tried to remain creative in a very tough world to stay that way. And I really have tried to develop a sharing culture in our own circle, as well as finding daily inspiration through doing little things that are creative, whether it be filming a passion project or filming a spec commercial or a spec scene. It hasn't always been successful, but at the end of the day, I've really enjoyed it. So having said that, I'll get right to the podcast and talk about our first guest. His name is Grant Peelle. I met Grant a few years ago on a common project, and Grant has had a great background of being a director, producer, and also a great storyteller. He has a working connection with Still Motion, now Muse Storytelling, and you have to check their site out. They've done a lot of great work for some pretty fun companies and forward-thinking people. Today he talks really about the art of conducting an interview and the importance of connecting with the interviewee. He has a different style, which I've definitely been witness to and improved my own interview techniques, which I think has been exciting. It's really important. He also discussed the importance of kind of breaking down a scene or breaking down an interview or a shoot in a post-mortem, and that's something we tend to do to set you up for future success. So again, he talks about what it takes to be a great storyteller, and really just something that I think you're going to enjoy. So Grant, every good story starts out with a beginning. So tell me about your beginning.
I'll attempt to be brief but thorough in sharing my backstory, because my origin story is one that I feel like many people will associate with, and there'll be real value in that. But I tend to be a storyteller, and so I can at times be long-winded. So attempt to bring me in, if you will, James. So I went to college as a theater major. I got the bug of wanting to tell, express, and be a part of powerful stories in junior high school, when I was a part of summer theater, high school productions, things of that nature, and was fortunate enough to be invited to participate in a theater program at Otterbein College, and was surrounded by folks that I now Facebook stalk who have gone on to do incredibly powerful performances. They have been on The Walking Dead, or they've performed with Sally Field at the National Theater in Washington, D.C. They're winning Tonys on Broadway. They're touring Europe and across America on Broadway. These are really powerful actors. But I didn't have the courage to pursue a career in theater, and I knew that I didn't want to raise a family in New York or Los Angeles. So I settled for creating a life for myself in Cowtown, Ohio. And it's a community of about 10,000 people. And my lifestyle is rich in family and small town values, and I absolutely love it. But they're right about the same time of 2008, 2009, 2010, when the 5D Mark II set about a revolution of filmmakers. I too, like everybody else, was a moth to the flame. I started consuming as much 5D Mark II footage as I possibly could on Vimeo. And if you watched any Vimeo in 08, 09, 2010, you immediately got caught in the vortex of wedding filmmakers, right? That was the big, hot, interesting content that was out there. And the reason being that it was now beautiful, right? You now had shallow depth of field, and you knew that these were brides. These were real people who were experiencing cinematic moments, right? The really powerful experiences in 3, 5, 4 minute highlight films. And I went, these wedding films are better than actually being a participant, right? All of a sudden, you would watch a wedding film and go, that was more awesome than if I were there. That was more awesome than if I was the best man. Like, in fact, if I'm a bride or a groom and I'm looking back on this, I go, that is my best life, right? Those are the highlights of my moment. I encapsulated that, and I went, I want that. Like, I want that for me, and I want that for my family. And I had just had my first son, and I went, I want to be a filmmaker and make the world's best home movies. That was initially the draw to do that. And so I invested in a 5D Mark II. And then I went,
along with thousands of people.
Yeah, of course, right? Absolutely. Along with every aspiring filmmaker known to man that could find a way to scrape nickel and dime, into what was a very affordable filmmaking tool by comparison to filmmaking expenses, right? Like most Hollywood films would be, tens upon tens of thousands of dollars in equipment. And here was a camera that, was like $2,500 or something, right? That, felt like, that's very approachable, yet still an investment that doesn't come lightly, right? You
found a way to scrape that $2,500 together.
Yeah,
you were kind of like, it's not in my bed, but I'll go get it.
And it's certainly not something that most spouses get excited about spending money on, right? Like, you have to find a way to get the family PO approved, right? So I got the family PO approved to invest in this 5D Mark II, and then I went, holy shit, I don't know what to do with this thing. Right? I have no idea what to do with this thing. And so I started looking for tutorials online. Who could teach me how to use this thing? And, along about that time, the one group that was offering education was Still Motion. And they weren't only offering tutorials, but they were offering inspiration, right? The pieces that they were creating separated themselves from the rest of the wedding filmmaking market. They didn't at first, but they started to, because they started to see the power of story. So instead of just showing a bunch of crazy visuals and tossing it over music and calling it a highlight reel, they went, let's do something more meaningful. Let's tell a powerful story that happens to take place at a wedding, as opposed to let's find the most interesting way to film the rings and the dress. And that was a noticeable difference on my part. But I couldn't articulate it. Like, I had no way of going, oh, what they're doing is this, right? But I knew that it was different. And so I wanted to figure out what the hell was different. Why are they different? What are they doing that's different?
That was the magic, because you thought, wow, they're just cool shots put together, right? You couldn't define, like, there's something they're doing that's different.
There's something that's different. And so back then, if they didn't radio check the right little box on Vimeo, there was the ability for an end user to download the source file. I could just go into Vimeo and be like, download, right? And I'd be like, thanks for that, wedding. And so what I would do is I would take these files that I would download, and I would put them inside of Adobe Premiere. And I would go through and I would create an edit at every single cut. And then I took that first frame and I exported it into a storyboard that I'd created in Illustrator. And then I described it, and I put a spreadsheet that like talked about every single length of clip. So
You're insane.
I was reverse engineering it.
Exactly.
Right? Because I'm like, what are they doing
right
in their end? Well, this is what it taught me. Most shots were like 2.5 seconds long. And I would, as a dad, be filming something and I'd be rolling for like 3 minutes before I'd move. And you're not going to use any of that. Or you're going to use 3 seconds of a moment in a powerful film, and then you need to move on.
It's a hell of a 3 seconds, though.
Well, for sure. It was a very purposeful, powerful, well-composed, beautifully lit, emotion-filled 3 seconds, right? Like, and those were the next layers that you start to learn. But at first, if all you did was just film something wide, medium, and tight, and edit it into 2.5 second increments, bing, bang, bong, bing, bang, bong, and then you just put a whole string of those together, your work would immediately be 10x better than most other aspiring filmmakers. And I learned that early, right? And just by kind of, backing my way into it, right? Not really understanding that. Cut to, a moment where they tweeted out that they needed a PA in Chicago. And I went, do I have the courage to answer this request for a production assistant? I was like, well, hell yeah, I do. Like, how can I not want to work with the people that like I'm cyber stalking on a daily basis? So yeah, I'm down. Like, let's do this thing. So I answered and they said, great. Can you be there at 4 a.m. on Thursday? Yeah, sounds great. And then I got scared because I didn't know anything. I mean, nothing. And so I tried to back out. I'm like, I DM'd him real quick. I'm like, just to be clear, I don't know the city of Chicago, because I thought they're going to ask me to drive around and go, and I'm going to know. And then they said, oh, it all takes place in the aquarium. You won't need to leave. Okay. All right. So I can't get out of it now. So I drove up to Chicago. It cost me more to like put myself in and to my food and my hotel and gas and time than they were paying, but it was going to be worth it. Right. And I show up and I'm 37 and my counterpart for the day is a 19-year-old PA, as they should be, right? Most PAs should be 19. They shouldn't be 37, right?
Well, you know what PA stands for? Pay again is what we ended up doing. It's just paying and paying. You thought, because you're not there to make money. You're there for the experience. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and that could be just schlepping coffee all day, like whatever it is, right? Like no worries there. So I was down. I was ready to go, whatever. Show up at 4 a.m. And the very first thing they asked me to do is put this tripod up. And I peed down my leg because I went, I had no idea what to do. And I thought, here are the filmmakers that I want to impress, right? That I want to be working with or learning from. And I'm immediately going to be exposed in the first 30 seconds on set because I don't know how to create this, to set up this tripod. And so I just turned my back to them and I figured it out. And I did it and I walked away like, yep, I know exactly what I'm doing. And that was my entire MO all for the 3-day shoot that I was with them, is I just kept thinking to myself, whenever they asked for a 50 millimeter lens, today I could reach into a bag and I'd know it by feel, right? Like, oh, that's a 50, right? But then I had no idea. So I would just turn my back to them and I would look and shuffle through the shoot sack as fast as I could to identify the one that said 50 on it. And then I'd turn around and hand it to them. And that was it. I mean, and from that moment forward, I went like, the key to my success as a filmmaker is not going to be my knowledge. It's going to be my willingness to work my ass off until I figure it out. Because all of these things I learned immediately are approachable. They're doable. They're achievable. There's nothing that is happening in the world of filmmaking that we can't, through trial and error, effort, sweat, and tears, figure out. And more importantly, the journey is where the sweet sauce is. It's not in the final product. It's in learning, creating, feeling, experiencing, collaborating, ideating. It's in all of that the magic and the fulfillment comes from it. And that's why I was like, okay, great. Like, I'm down for this, right? Like, however long it takes me and in whatever way, I end up, whether I, win an Oscar or I, do something that, plays to 20 people in the local VA. Like, it doesn't matter, right? Because it's going to be the journey that is going to be of interest to me and not the destination. And so, that's how my little budding film career began, was just by cyber stalking, reverse engineering, and then being willing to just eat crow for however long it was going to take to get better.
Do you find that just being on set, via osmosis or diffusion or whatever you call it, how much did you actually pick up and know that, God, I can figure this stuff out? It just means I'm just glad to be on set. And that's what was the most important thing, because you had bought your ticket for admission, literally, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of like how much can be learned on set, for me, everything. And that's if it comes with a spirit of wanting to learn. You have to be observational. I think that's probably one of our greatest skills as filmmakers, is being observational. Just knowing and anticipating human behavior so that we can then either, in a documentary film, create an environment where the most authentic, pure, and real moment can actually manifest and play itself out in front of our camera without us having as little impact in that moment as possible. Or in a narrative piece, knowing human behavior on a level that will allow us to create the space and the encouragement that an actor can then create and perform that emotion for us. But if you're not observant, if you aren't taking in all of your surroundings at all times and trying to gather as much inspiration from all experiences in life at all times, then, we run the risk of putting the blinders on and not being informed, not having any of that stuff. So could I show up on set as a production assistant and learn nothing? Absolutely. Could I show up as a production assistant and learn how to be a better director? All day. The question is, when you're there and you're present and things are happening, what are you watching? What questions are you asking? Who are you having networking with? Who are you dialoguing with over lunch? What questions are you asking those people? So, not only did I play the role of a production assistant for 3 days, and you can bet your ass that when it was lunchtime, I was finding a way to sit next to somebody that I wanted to learn something from. And I was asking questions over, a hot ham and cheese for that 30 minutes. And they weren't getting away without me walking away going, okay, today was entirely worth it, if nothing else, just for this 10 minutes that we shared over this sandwich. And within your team, within the crew, so that they want to do powerful and awesome work, that they want to challenge themselves to take a moment and a breath before we roll on every scene and say, how can I make this better in the next 10 seconds before we hit go, so that everybody is elevated and raised to that next level. And if you can do those two things, then it is really much more about your approach to something and the way that the attitude that you're bringing to a piece, much more so than, do you have the right equipment? Are you shooting 8K?
So, Grant, one of the strongest things I've seen you do, and I want you to talk about the evolution of the art of conducting an interview. Everybody thinks they know how to interview until you have really dissected the art of doing a great interview. And you alluded to that before about not having the interviewee be performative or really feel like you have a couple great stories about that. But tell me how that evolved. Was it before you did your documentary, or was it after? And please talk about that.
So, for me, the art of an interview is tremendously important. It's nigh near a religion in terms of the where I find that I can offer solid value to a set. Is like, okay, this is wheelhouse for me. I love conducting powerful and effective interviews. That wasn't always the case. So the first film that I made was a feature-length documentary called I'm Fine, Thanks. It explores complacency. Why do we exchange our dreams for a complacent lifestyle? It was a reflection of my own personal journey into becoming a filmmaker, right? It was, hey, I had shelved all of my dreams and aspirations to be a storyteller. I was putting my boys to bed at night, encouraging them to, think big things and do big things, but I wasn't modeling that behavior. So I said, great, line in the sand, I'm going to go do this. And so my friend Adam Baker, who is the producer, and we assembled a team. We took a van 10,000 miles across America and interviewed 52 people about this subject. Baker conducted most of the interviews in that documentary. And the reason being is that we were under the assumption that producers play that role more frequently than a director does when it comes to a documentary. And so as a result of that, that's the habit that we find ourselves falling into. But I would always back cleanup. So he would conduct the interview, and then at the end of the interview, then he would step aside and I would step in, and I was there to raise any additional questions, challenge them on any thoughts that I felt like maybe they needed to be challenged on, and that kind of a thing. And then shortly thereafter, I was helping out on some corporate bio docs, right? Like it's the small business story that we all know that we're invited to tell, right? It's the origin story, or it's the aspirational story that a small business has. And as a result of that, I was invited to conduct some of these interviews. And in working with the team of filmmakers that I was working with, the style and approach to that kept increasingly becoming more and more sophisticated and more intentional, right? So instead of just finding ourselves going into the habits of what might be expected on a film set, quote unquote, like we did when Baker was conducting the interviews, because his title said producer, that's what happens. On film sets, you often have the formalities of slate, right? And sound speed, camera speed, blah, 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 all of this vernacular that happens around that. Now, all of that immediately sets about performative quality, because everybody says to ourselves, why are we here in this room right now? We're here to conduct this quote unquote interview, and this is what we all need to do. So we all put on these figurative hats, director and cameraman and DP and sound guy, all of these things. And we went, wait a minute, how do we remove all of that? How do you strip away all of that? How do you make the lights and the camera and the audio gear figuratively not exist, right? How do you remove it from the paradigm of the person that you're having this conversation with on camera? Because we all realize that we have our most powerful moments and our most revealing moments when we're just having conversations with friends, not when we're standing in front of people, on stage with the need to perform or to be something that isn't who we are. And so as a result of that, man, we just lean into that, and more and more techniques came about to the point where we realized that if we have conversation with somebody in the other room before we actually have our on-camera conversation, we can invite them naturally without even needing to acknowledge that that's what we're doing, just through small gestures, like a tug on someone's elbow will naturally bring them into the other room if you're having conversation with them, and you can keep that conversation going to the moment where you just gesture to the chair that they're to sit in. And if you've removed them from any of the time that the lights were being set up and the audio boom pole was being positioned and all of those things, if you can remove them from that environment as that all of that gets built, then you can actually just bring them into this naturally, bring them into the interview situation, invite them to have a seat, and you can continue your conversation. And if that conversation never breaks, then it's only a conversation, right? So we can remove the idea of first question. This is how we begin, right? Like all of those kinds of things get removed, and the goal being, and we actually have this on camera from dozens of people, is that in the middle of your on-camera conversation, they're going to go, are we going to start soon?
That's awesome. Now, was that an evolution then?
It was.
I mean, did you start by saying we're not going to call we're not going to call action anymore and have people doing it? Because we've stopped doing that as well. In observance of what you've been doing, we said we will have some sort of signal squeeze on the shoulder. We have a code 50-50 or whatever it is. We just roll without them saying. So did you evolve in that and said, "Hey, man, this really gets people comfortable"?
It does evolve in that sense, and it was like it was just asking ourselves the question. So one of the other habits that I think are tremendously powerful in filmmaking is postmortem, right? Like going back and reviewing. How do we improve what we've just accomplished, right? And so if you do that at the end of every single piece that you've ever made, your next piece will be its best, because you will be at your best. And so, when you get out of that habit, that's when your work, starts to either become complacent. It's when you're no longer challenging yourself creatively. It's when you're no longer growing. It's, and so as a result of that, at the end of every one of these, experiences, we could invite ourselves to say, how do we do that better? And you go, oh, well, we can do it better by making sure that no one is on their phone while we're having this on-camera conversation, right? Because the audio guy in the corner could distract by checking his phone the person that we're having an on-camera conversation with and change the dynamic of the room entirely, right? So it's like those small decisions that can make all of the difference in the world that you want to continue to elevate. And I've learned and have developed techniques that, improve my ability to segue from where we are in conversation to where I want them to go in conversation. And so, one of the things that I've been invited to do occasionally as a dog and pony show is to teach some classes to other aspiring filmmakers, which is a tremendously rewarding opportunity as a give back. And in a how to conduct a powerful interview scenario, one of the things we'll do is we'll ask the group of filmmakers to come up with 3 questions that they want me to ask naturally to someone that we're just going to have an improv conversation with. And of course, they're giving you these crazy random ideas, right? Like, are you a boxers and brief guy? What was the name of your first dog? And, do you brush your teeth right or left-handed, right? Like, you're going, how do I go from those, those 3 random ideas? But as a powerful example, say, for example, that I need you to go from, what's the name of your dog to, are you a boxers and brief guy, right? So I'm asking, James, you ever had a dog in your life?
No, I have not.
You've never had a dog.
Never had a dog in my life.
Dude.
Yeah.
So two thoughts about that. The first of which is I got this neighbor who thought about getting a dog for her kids. And she's having a conversation with a friend of hers, and she's like, I'm thinking about getting a dog for my kids, but I don't know if I should. And her friend said, well, I really think you need to do that because dogs teach empathy, right? And her friend said, well, when I grew up, I didn't have a dog. And her friend said, exactly. And she goes, oh yeah, you're right. I need to get a dog for my kids. Right. So, so having a dog is a really powerful thing, but like dogs bring such joy and happiness into your lives. Like my dog always used to like go and grab my underwear and like just take it down the hallway. Right. Like, you're right. Like, and so like right now, could you imagine him like running through with the box? Are you boxer or brief guy?
Yeah. I am a boxer.
You're a boxer guy? Oh, a boxer brief guy. Oh, so you're like a hybrid dude.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, that is wild.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's crazy. So see, now I asked you about your dog.
Right.
And we've gotten to boxers and briefs, and none of that felt unnatural.
Right.
Right? Because I could bring all of that into me.
But that's a special skill that people have to know how to do that.
But I've developed it over time because that wasn't something that was natural to the way that I was conducting an interview before. So I would do these mind maps, right? So it was like, all right, I have 10 major story points that I need to hit with somebody. And I'm not going to ask them sequentially because often the emotion of an environment is, doesn't happen that way, right? Like it's not that convenient. And so I wouldn't want you crying on the second question that I asked you when I have 8 more questions that I need to get from you, right? Like we wouldn't do that, right? Okay.
Do you write any of this down?
So initially I would, but then I'll memorize it, right? So then I've got a mind map, right? That affords me that I know that these story points are the ones that I have to hit. We've actually elevated that now to the point where it's possible through the use of either a laptop or a phone that you can put it out of eye line of the person that you're having a conversation with, and you can have a live Google document that has all of your notes in it. And as you hit them, a producer who's in the other room can be removing the items that you've already captured and bringing up larger, and actually can giving you real-time feedback that it's like, oh, they stumbled over this.
Ask it again.
Yep. I need to get this clean. Find another way to ask that again. But it's as a result of that mind map and needing to go through the 10 story points that I realized like, oh, I need a really solid way to get from question 3 to question 4. And that's unnatural. Right. Like how on earth am I going to do that? And that's when I realized, oh, it's like tennis. I can bring the ball into me. And when the ball is into me, I can go anywhere with it before I hand it back to you. Right. And so that's when I can make crazy connections with like a dog and underwear that make a segue feel natural because it's conversational. Because if I did it like through a list of itemized questions, all right, James, question number 1, you ever own a dog? Question number 2, are you a boxer or brief guy? What?
You know what you're going to get? You're going to get 1 or 2 word answers.
All day.
You don't feel like there's any story behind it. Yeah, I'm a dog guy. And that would probably be about it.
Yeah.
Conversation's over.
Yeah. And what kind of a relationship have I established with you?
Well, so often that's how people run through it. And do you ever notice that a lot of these interviews are like, let's just get this over with, which is a horrible way to spend time.
And we've seen people predicate interviews with that very language. They'll walk into the room and say, all right, look, dude, you got to get through this. I got to get through that. Like, give me 7 minutes. Let's just knock this out. Go. Imagine, right? What did I just do to your value? I just said you have 0 value. I do not care about you, what questions you need to answer, whatever. Like, and I know that what the person was trying to do, the intention behind that was, hey, I do value you. I know that you're in pain. I'm in pain. Let's be in pain together for only 7 minutes. Let's get through this or whatever, and let's move on, right? Versus like, hey, spend 3 minutes and get to be their friend. Then spend the additional 4 asking them a question that's going to be worthwhile capturing on camera.
Yeah, and that can transcend the whole film. It can transcend a series of films. That one quote can be the quote of the century, if you will.
Unquestionably. I mean, I had the rare opportunity to interview Andrew Luck once on behalf of a gentleman who was in hospice care and had been afforded a dream, and he wanted to go to the Indianapolis Colts game. Right. And then he got a chance to meet Andrew Luck. And then as fate would have it, the day that I show up to be with Andrew Luck, I had arrived 5 hours in advance so that I could set up all the lights and be so on, like dialed in or whatever. And when I show up, they said, yeah, so we've moved your interview with Andrew from 5 o'clock to 12:15. And I looked at it and it's noon.
Great.
And I said, she said, how much time do you need to set up? I said, how much time can you give me? She said, I can give you 15 minutes. I'll be ready in 15. And so we busted our tail throwing the lights up and the setup and getting where we could or whatever to the moment where, and so I had this moment to breathe, one breath before we brought Andrew in. And I had this, it's called an eye view. It's like an interrotron. So he was looking dead into the lens and he's looking at my reflection and we're having this connection or whatever. And I started, and I wish that I had more experience than I did then, because it was earlier in my filmmaking career. If I'd have taken just 2 minutes to get to know the man before I invited him to be in front of the camera, and because we only had 15 minutes to set stuff up, I had kind of rushed my own process. I had him, even despite all of those moments, I had him on the verge of being reflective enough that I almost got him to tear, thinking about the fact that there was a gentleman in hospice care whose only dream in the world was to have met him. And I almost had him there. And if I'd have taken the 2 or 3 minutes to shake his hand and connect with him as a human before I put him in front of the camera, I'd have gotten that. And I know it. I know that now, right? Again, this postmortem process is tremendously powerful, tremendously important. And it's worth noting that sometimes we're going to fail, but we can be better next time. And so I know that next time I may not be successful, but I'm going to set myself up for success, right? I'm going to give myself the opportunity to swing for the fences when I have that same chance.
I mean, that is amazing. The thing also that I see is that, especially with the newer filmmakers or people who do this for a living, they spend more time worried about the camera and the lensing and everything else like that. You really feel that prepping for the interview far outweighs, obviously, the most beautifully shot interview.
Well, imagine just in your mind's eye, close your eyes for a moment. In your mind's eye, put 2 frames next to one another. One is framed beautifully. It's perfectly ratio, right? It's an 8-to-1 ratio. It's your background is bokeh and it's all buttery and beautiful and gorgeous. And that person in front of that lens is talking like this. Yeah. No.
You've had those.
Whatever.
You've had those interviews though, haven't you?
Well, you know that they may start that way,
right?
But I will never let them in that way. But the point being, imagine that it's beautiful, it's gorgeous, it's got everything set up for it. It's exactly what you want it for. Now, on the flip side, in the other frame, put somebody who's got a blown out window in the background, right? It's shot at f11. Everything is completely in focus, and the background is all dirty and nasty. But it's a mom, a Gold Star mom, talking about the memory of her son. And she's raw, and she's real, and she's powerful. I mean, damn. I see it, and I can tell you which one I care about. You tell me what was shot on what. You tell me what lens was used. Now, don't get me wrong. I love beautiful, buttery, gorgeous images, right? They're powerful. Now, imagine if you put the 2 together. Imagine the Gold Star mom in the buttery, gorgeous 8-to-1 ratio, right? Are you kidding me?
It brings it up another level.
Oh, I mean, it just melts me into the couch, right? I mean, it just, yes, please, right? That's where I want to live for a while,
That is amazing. And I know that it's the bread and butter of any filmmaker is to be the interviews are bread and butter, and you have to be good at them. The people who are good at them and produce good work are the ones that get on a 30 for 30 or Chef's Table or whatnot. I find their interviews are just gorgeously shot and also very compelling, and they seem to have gotten that formula right.
And I think that the beautiful interviews are stepping up. I think that we've seen a remarkable bell curve of beauty happening in that arena, even since 2008, right? You really kind of see the art of the talking head taking it to an elevated level. And here more recently, I've been trying to perfect a technique where we can actually have someone engaged in something meaningful while having a conversation with them, instead of just having to have that talking head, right? It's born of the SVU, kind of
Please call it peanut butter and jelly.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, right, exactly, right. It's the peanut
Grant,
butter interview.
you got to explain the peanut butter and jelly because I cannot watch a Law and Order episode without saying, oh, that's peanut butter and jelly
that's
shot.
the thing. Yep. So the idea being that the homicide is taking place and the detectives show up at a place of work and they're needing to get crucial information from a potential witness, and the witness is engaged in some activity, right? So they're loading in cases of beer in the back of the bar, and the detectives show up and they're having the conversation with them, and they're like, "Hey, you ever seen this girl?" And they show the guy a picture, and while he's still loading the cases of beer, he's like, "Yeah, I see her. She shows up every Tuesday, 6:32, just like clockwork, And meanwhile, they share with her, well, she was killed last night, right? He doesn't stop his work. He's still just moving the beer. Right? Still moving the beer. It's like, well, that's just too bad. You ever see anybody that you might think of doing it? Yeah, well, there's that Jimmy guy. He's the guy. He goes to the restroom every 5 minutes. But he's still packing the beer. He doesn't stop his work. Never mind that detectives are, maybe asking you about a murder, right? And you wouldn't want to stop your behavior, but it's because the directors know, look, if all of a sudden the dude stops and they just stand there and talk, nobody's going to want to watch that, right? Then it just becomes the entire piece becomes nothing but people standing around, either at the bar or the precinct having conversation about a dead girl, right? Like, it just doesn't work.
But funny enough, that's how I look at it as not even an evolution, but a transition in a narrative where most of the film really is just two people talking. And how they make that interesting, and even how we do our own filmmaking to introduce blocking or interesting blocking. And that's another evolution of being able to get the most out of an interview. Fewer words, how that's paced and everything. And the nuance of interview, I think, transcends into narrative while filmmaking.
To me, it's all about human behavior, right? And what can we do to anticipate or to elevate human behavior? Right? If you draw the line all the way back and you come full circle back to that experience of the same day edits that lived on Vimeo that were so powerful and like moth to a flame, caused me to launch into a desire to be a filmmaker. And you go, it's the human behavior in front of that camera that makes all the difference. Right. And so, whether it's authentic in documentary or whether it's manipulated in narrative, it's what can we do to more powerfully tell that story of human behavior. And ultimately it comes down to connection for me, right? When the behavior connects me to myself more deeply, that's when I'm most moved, right? It's when I can be, when I go, oh, I'm learning about myself while watching this thing. That is what transcends. That's the powerful movies. Those are the ones I want to talk about. Those are the ones that I want to encourage someone else to go see, watch, share.
Which is difficult now because, as you know, with the blockbuster type movies where they're just visually overwhelming sometimes, which is, that's a genre that's popular and it definitely has its place and people enjoy that. The popcorn movies, it's very difficult to come up with great narrative movies that people want to go see. And I call them quiet movies where it's actually dialogue driven. And, I've heard before that all those kind of movies are just two people talking about their feelings, but that's kind of what's important. Like you said, it's the human condition that's so important.
There's certainly the kind of movies that I get drawn to are pieces like Good Will Hunting, right? That it's a transcendiary moment in the zeitgeist of culture that just, it's like the perfect fit for something that exposes something in who we are at the perfect time. And it just transcends, right? It becomes classic instantly in that moment. And, for me, it was powerful because I was, within that same general age of the protagonists in that piece when it came out. And so, of course I'm going to attach myself to that, right? In a really profound and interesting way. If I'd been 5 when that movie comes out, it's not going to have the same power for me, right? If I was 75 at the time, I might have a connection with it because there would be a romantic connection that would have reconnected me to my youth, right? And my experience in that way, but maybe not.
So what do you think the most important thing is in for a take-home message? Because, this podcast really is about how to conduct a great interview and how to throw everything else out that you've learned about in interviews in the past. What would you think the most important teaching point would be in telling filmmakers?
So I would boil it down to this one analogy. Conduct an interview in the same way that you would have coffee with a friend. And that framing comes from my friend Patrick, who brought that idea to the approach to a non-performative on-camera conversation, right? Meaning, would you bring a list of questions to a cup of coffee with a friend? No way. Would I feel badly about interrupting my friend in natural conversation? No way. Like, it's going to happen in dialogue, right? So I don't have to wait for someone to have completed a full thought or a full story before I can encourage them, ask them more. I can go more deeply. I give myself that freedom, right, within the conversation to challenge somebody. If I have a friend that I think is screwing up, I'm going to call them out on the carpet, right? In that same way, you need to be able to have a willingness to do that with a character when they're in front of that, when they're having an on-camera conversation. So, also, I would never use film language in a conversation with a friend at coffee. Speeding, cut, or if something went badly, we would just continue conversation until we, continued on, right? Like, my cup of coffee goes dry. I may mention something to the waiter, or I may put my hand up or whatever, but I'm not going to stop my conversation with somebody until my coffee is filled up again, right? If a light goes down or whatever, just segue into non-story related conversation, but keep the conversation going, because then when you segue back, then it remains natural. It doesn't ever become performative. There's a technique to that I call the vamp, and that's in musical theater. If you're familiar with musical theater at all, there are moments in musical theater where characters stop singing, but the music doesn't stop. And so they start dialogue, and you never know in a performance how long that dialogue is going to take, because some nights there's more of a breath to it, and other nights there's not. And so what happens is the songwriter writes in a repeat, right? So it could be 3 bars, it could be 4 bars, it could be 2 bars, but it's a vamp, and it continues to repeat until the conductor raises their arms and strokes the downbeat, and now we continue on in the song, and that's called a vamp. And so we use vamps like crazy in interviews, right? So if I'm conducting an interview with you and all of a sudden a train goes by, I will never ask you to hold for sound. I'll just vamp. I'll start talking to you about something else that's not story relevant. And then the moment the train has gone by, then I'll continue the conversation. And so, I think that's a really powerful way to approach it that allows you to begin to make decisions in the moment that are going to set you up for success. Meaning, if I'm having a cup of coffee with a friend, how would I do that? Great. Make those decisions behaviorally, and you're going to always set a really good framework for a very successful interview, right? You don't have to think about all of the specifics. Just don't do anything that you wouldn't do with a friend if you were having a cup of coffee, right? As soon as you start making bad decisions like that, then you're going to set up for failure.
I think that's definitely good advice. And as far as, and I'll go down this route because I want to know who's some of the most notable people you've interviewed, and it's one of those things that I'm sure we all want to know, and kind of how they reacted.
Okay, so I would say that the best story around a powerful person that I've had the opportunity to interview that really challenged my ability to conduct a successful interview was Paul Rice. He's the founder and CEO of Fair Trade USA. Okay, he has been on the cover of Success Magazine twice. Okay, so this is the kind of guy that is a power player, right? He was in Nicaragua and helped create fair trade practices at a time where you can imagine that like the alternative could possibly be like guerrilla retaliation, right? So this is not a weak dude. So we show up and we're going to have this on-camera conversation. And the producer goes over and introduces himself, and they start this conversation. And Paul is changing shirts in his office, and he says, "All right, where's the list of questions you're going to give me?" And producer goes, "Well, we conduct our on-camera conversations very differently than most people do. We just have a natural conversation. It's just real. It's whatever." And Paul goes, "No. You've never seen me on camera. I'm good. Where are the questions? And the producer's like, well, look, I really don't have any of them written down. Give me a moment. And so then he's, coming to me and going, hey, look, this is what just happened. Like, Paul just called me on the road, whatever. And I'm like, okay, here's the mind map, right? Tell him that we're going to talk about origin story, fair trade practices. What can somebody do to make a lifestyle change today in order to affect and assure that slavery is not a part of the sourcing of your product, right? Like, so I had this like 4 or 5 major highlight topics or whatever, and producer went back in and was able to sell that. Whew. Okay, I thought crisis averted, right? Dude is going to have to like really be on point today or whatever, but we got through that moment. Okay, so then Paul steps outside and he's being mic'd, right? And I'm having conversation with him because, again, while the microphone is being put on him, I'm just chatting him up, keeping his attention on everything but what we're about to do, right? You don't want to bring attention to the idea that he's going to be putting a mic on him. I'm just like, hey, my friend Jeremy's going to just needs to take a moment here and get you set up for audio. And then I'm continuing conversation. And I'm like, hey, man, the producers do a background on everybody here. And it said, one of the words that was used for you was Hellraiser. I'm like, that's pretty wild or whatever. He's like, yeah. And that was like it, like no additional response. That was just, and I'm like,
you thought you'd get some sort of response.
Yeah, I thought, okay, I'm going to make a connection with this guy. So I'm trying to make this connection and I'm failing just to connect with him on a person to person basis. Right. Thankfully, Jeremy, who was running audio, goes, oh, hey man, I see that you're a scuba diver. And Paul's like, yeah. He's like, you scuba? He's like, yeah. And they all of a sudden, like, boom, they connect over scuba. And I'm just like, oh, thank you, Jeremy. Like, you just saved me, right? So this moment is now transitioning to the point where I'm going to need to have this on camera conversation. So I take the relay stick from Jeremy, right? And I engage in conversation with Paul, and I've got him going now. Thankfully, Paul's in a little better place now that we've started talking scuba. And I gesture to where Paul's going to sit, and Paul takes a seat, and I, sit where I'm going to sit, and I'm continuing to have conversation with him. And he goes, stop, hold up. I want to see this frame. You sit here. And so he gets up and he has me sit down where he was seated, and he goes in behind the camera and he looks at the frame that we've set up for his interview. What? Unbelievable. Like, what a power play, right?
Yeah,
like straight up.
Who's in control?
Yes,
here,
right? Like, yeah, right. Yeah, sure, dog. You know what I mean? Like, you just going to see who like, I am the alpha dog here, right?
Right.
You little
and
pup.
Don't you
forget it, right?
Right.
Okay. So so he likes the frame. He sits back down, I sit back down, and now I'm launching into conversation with him, right? And I'm like, oh, here we go. So I just figuratively strap in and just like, let's go. And another technique in an interview is to note that the person is going to be a reflection of you, right? So the energy I bring to the moment is going to be the energy that I receive back, right? So if I need them to be really thoughtful and introspective, that's where I'm going to be when I talk, right? Or if they're about to play the Super Bowl, then I'm going to be big and loud and fired up and right, like I'm going to live there. So I'm like, I've got to like get this, I got to match this guy's energy. So I immediately start like, let's go. So it was like, so we're just in, and he is so articulate, and he has, his answers dialed in terms of like his radio answers, right? Whatever. And so then I start challenging him a little bit on some stuff. And there was a moment where like we really got into this dialogue or whatever, and we're really having this moment. And the moment that the interview turned around for me is when I go, man, that is awesome. And he goes, fuck yeah, it is. And I was like, and I go, you are fucking right. And it was like, boom, we are there now.
Right.
In this moment,
yeah,
where I met him on his energy, he met me on his energy, and we trusted one another. Right. And it took a whole nother level. It immediately, like the walls fell off, like all of his defenses were gone, and we just had a real conversation. And since then, I have a tremendous friendship with this dude. Like, it's right? Crazy. I could just text a dude and be like, let's go do some tequila shots. Like, let's chill. And he's just such a neat dude, but he has to, in his line of work, really be an alpha. And so that's how he approached it to begin with. And once I met his alpha energy, and once we connected on that alpha moment, then it was like, that's what I'm talking about, right? Now we can really like get somewhere and be transformative in who we are and what's happening here in this moment. So that's by far right now my most challenging interview to date.
I can't imagine.
Paul Rice, founder and CEO of Fair Trade USA. This dude is he is something else, and he is a powerful character.
That is amazing. So right now you're to pivot into what's happening with you now. What have you been doing lately, and what do you look at to do in the future?
So I've had the pleasure and opportunity to be doing some freelance work recently as a creative director, and I'm been doing a good bit of work with a group called Muse Storytelling, and one of the more interesting or marquee clients that they're doing a good bit of work with is Four Seasons. And so it's been really interesting getting to be a part of telling stories around a billion-dollar luxury brand, but noting that at the core and the essence of their DNA, who they are, is that they believe that the world is richer when you connect to the people in the world around you. And so we're able to use that as our invitation into discovering and doing a lot of story finding around pieces that help them leverage how they can remind people to take their time. And that is the very specific language around a campaign that they just launched recently that is the first of a host of storytelling that they want to do around that idea. And it's the largest campaign that they've run in the last 10 years. So it's been really powerful to be a part of a team that's working on creating and helping facilitate storytelling with somebody that maybe, more naturally, the documentary film world often finds itself helping emerging countries tell stories in order to help get support and gain interest and traction around that. On the other side of that coin is a brand like Four Seasons, which you think could potentially be full of empty, stories that aren't nearly as powerful in terms of helping people make a human connection. But what's interesting is that in spending the amount of time that we have getting to know them, getting to know the people that have used their services, and getting to know their employees, you really start to understand how powerfully they want to help people connect. And it's that is the secret sauce of Four Seasons, and why people return is because the way that they feel and the way that they feel connected to the brand and to the people around them when they have that experience. And so it's just been a tremendously rewarding and interesting opportunity to tell those stories.
I imagine it was a challenge to even approach such a known brand, which really is a luxury brand, and kind of apply that to kind of everyday things that makes them more human, so to speak. And I think that obviously that was your challenge, and how you pitch a big company like that, which is a whole nother thing. But I think it's great. Now, do you have a way that people can get a hold of you or see some of your work?
Yeah. So I just tend to live by Grant Peelle in most social situations. So whether that's personally or online. So I'm Grant Peelle on Facebook, Grant Peelle on Twitter, Grant Peelle on Instagram. Just everything lives with Peelle spelled Peelle, 2 L's. And that's how you can get in touch with me.
Well, we really appreciate the time you spent with us, and we wish you luck, and I think I'm sure we'll go on to series 2 and 3 and 4 with the other aspects of filmmaking. So thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure to spend time with you. Thanks, James.
Okay, that was our first podcast in the book. That was Grant Peelle, and by all means, if you can, check out some of his work. He has done a documentary, Stand With Me, and I'm Fine, Thanks. And again, not only a great creator, but just a wonderful person overall. So we are going to try to release these, if not every other week, once a month, but I think we can maintain a pace of every other week, and hopefully we get a few listeners and and you have the connection to hopefully share it with other people. Anyway, this is James signing out, and thanks so much.